Cool. Awesome. Hi, Jimmy. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Welcome to the show. It's nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me, man. Happy to do it. Yeah, it's fun to sit down and do this.
So one of the things I want to bugaboo about you about, I've been watching you play for a long time, at least the better part of the last decade.
A few years. Yeah. I guess so.
And I guess to be cheesy, you kind of embody a lot of what I love so much about music, and that we've talked about it a little bit with a couple people on the show, is how it transcends genres. It's not anything specific, and your solo stuff, is very country influence, country rockabilly influence, but you also play in funk bands.
Yeah,
you're playing. You're one of the lead members of Camaro 67, guitarist for Five Alarm Funk. So I've seen you play. I've seen you play soul. I've seen you play, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Where does that? I guess where did you get your start, and what brought you into the different genres that you play?
Yeah, I mean it's certainly true. I do find myself playing a lot of different styles of music, and for a long time I've understood that to somebody else that can look or seem surprising, right? Like, how's this guy playing country songs one night or singing country songs, and then playing with rock bands and funk bands and whatever else on another night. But to me, they're not so different. I mean, to me, it's just all music.
Yeah.
And there's lots of quotes out there, clever little smart ass quotes about there's only two kinds of music, good and bad, or whatever, right? So I'm always reminded of that
set over
thing,
a smoking cigar and a small glass of whiskey.
And on more than a time or two, I've been setting up on a, bar, restaurant gig or something. Somebody comes by and says what kind of music are you guys playing tonight? Right. And I usually just have some smart ass response to that. Well, good music, music, I hope. But the thing is, it's
I don't know which band I'm in tonight.
Right. Let me check the set list, or who else is coming tonight. But to be more serious about that, I think there's something sincere about that. What I'm trying to play is good music. And what I mean by that is music that's honest, that's soulful, that's, that's performed at a certain level. Right. And to me, once things are happening that way, then again, it doesn't really matter what any of us want to call it. Terms for genres and everything like that, they're useful. They have their place there, especially in terms of marketing and things like that, when you're trying to describe something or sell something. But from the creative side of it, I've never really gotten too hung up on that. It's just if something grabs me, or if it feels right, it feels good, I want to play it. I want to be involved with it. And from day one, when I started playing music, it was never really about one thing. I mean, when I first picked up a guitar as a teenager, I was a little metalhead, and a lot of my friends were too. So that's where it kind of started, was Megadeth and Slayer riffs and things like that, right?
Killing is my business and business is good. Still such a great album.
And as much as I was hungry to learn that stuff, and maybe that was, one of the main drivers of learning the instrument, it was always, from the beginning, there were always other things mixed in there. There was rock and blues and things like that. I was just as interested in John Lee Hooker and Mark Knopfler and the way they played guitar as I was Marty Friedman and these other guys. And then it just went from there. It wasn't more than about, 3 or 4 years of playing before jazz kind of grabbed me a little bit, and I got more interested in that, and great jazz guitarists and jazz musicians of all types and instruments. And that led me to go to music school, and here I am today, kind of thing. That's sort of the short version of that story.
And you studied at VCC, you said?
I did, yeah.
Do you find, I love that comment that you make when people ask, what are you playing tonight? You said good music. And I guess it's sort of a good, from on a much smaller scale, being, from just someone, do you remember when you were a kid, a teenager or even in your early 20s, whenever it was all about what kind of music you listen to.
Right. That's right.
That
it was really important, right? It was part of your identity as a teenager. It's a massive part of your identity.
And it was like,
right?
you know, am I hanging out with the Nirvana kids, or am I hanging out with the fucking Backstreet Boys kids?
Right.
Like, what am I doing? Right.
Because in high school, those are different people, right?
Yeah.
Those are different crews, different groups of people. And you kind of, to some extent, have to choose, or somebody will kind of choose for you in terms of how they perceive you, right?
And I remember people would ask you, like, I will ask you, what kind of music do you listen to? And I remember saying that exact thing that you just said, good music, or the kind that doesn't suck, was something that I would say a lot. Yeah. And I said that all, like, you know, and I still kind of feel like when you say that, some people don't get it.
No.
So do you ever feel that when you respond with that, I'm here to play good music, that they just don't really understand?
They're usually like, puzzled, or they think I'm being a jerk or something. Maybe I am. I don't mean to. Like I say, there's something to me that's very sincere about that, right? Good music, what that means, because we all know it when we hear it, and when you can feel it, right? Whether somebody is a hip hop artist or a country singer or a jazz saxophonist or whatever it is, or they're playing, you know, some Asian string instruments, like anything, right? Yeah. If somebody's playing it at a high level and they're playing it from their heart, right? You can tell that somebody's invested themselves in it, their life, they've built a skill set around it. And it comes across just the same way you can kind of tell if somebody's faking it, or they're not, they haven't really invested in it, in the craft, in the skill set. It's not to put anybody down,
or but
you can just tell, right?
Yeah.
You can tell, and it, you know, and it comes off that way. And sometimes it's a bit cringy, or sometimes it's just somebody who's starting out, and that's, of course, we all start somewhere and we're all trying to get there, right? I'm a long way from where I'd like to be as a musician, but the point is I keep working at it day in and day out, and I'll continue that till
that's like with everything, right? I mean, I think the mark of a true craftsperson or a true artist is really being comfortable with the fact that there's no ceiling.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no end to it. You're never going to be like, okay, that's right. I'm cooked. Yeah. I'm done. Take me out of the oven. I got nothing more to learn.
Yeah.
Because those people are so fucking boring.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a lie, right? None of us are ever finished with this music thing. There's always more you can learn, more you can do with it. And that's part of respecting the craft. And again, that comes across, right? When you see musicians play that that really respect the craft and the tradition of music making, it comes across.
Yeah. Was guitar kind of always your way in?
Trumpet was my very first instrument when I was about 12 or 13.
Did you play a high school band?
I did for a year or two. Yeah. But only for a couple of years. We moved around a little bit in those years. I moved around quite a bit as a kid, my family. Well, this is the thing, right? I was born up in Fort St. John.
Right.
But we moved from there when I was about 8 and moved down we lived in Port Kells in Surrey. And during that 2 years, my parents split. And then I lived with my mom, my brother and sister, and I went with my mom and lived in Cloverdale for a couple of years. Then we ended up moving back up north to Quesnel, where my mom grew up, and then Prince George. So, like, you know, several moves throughout the school years. Yeah. And which is tough, right? It's challenging. It's hard on kids. It was hard on us. I did that a lot as a kid. You know, you make friends and then you leave. You make friends and you leave, and it gets tough, and it's a little disruptive. And so 12 years old, I started playing trumpet in grade 7 when we were still in Cloverdale. Then we moved to Quesnel that was grade 8 for me. It was only 1 year. And then we moved to Prince George, and I was in grade 9. And the trumpet playing and the band thing just didn't survive those moves. I guess by the time I arrived in grade 9, I figured being a band geek wasn't cool, or wasn't what I wanted to do, or wasn't going to help me make the friends I wanted to make. I don't know. It was stupid, right? Just dumb
music
kid
programs
stuff.
Aren't unilateral across.
That's right. They're not the
schools.
Same quality everywhere you go, right? Some schools are great and everybody buys into it, and it is cool to play in the band in some schools. And in others, it's just like this out of the way afterthought, and only the nerds do that. You know what I mean?
That's why I played the bass. It's because I was doing the nerdy thing.
Right. It's unfortunate. I was playing
the cool instrument.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It is super unfortunate.
You know, because it's too bad, because it discourages kids, I think, from doing something that they'd otherwise like to do. And so for a long time, I regretted that, not keeping the trumpet. But yeah, those couple of years, I mean, it was a bit of an introduction to playing music for me, and I liked it. And And I knew somehow I knew I wanted to play trumpet when there was that option as a 12-year-old, like even as a 10 or 12-year-old. Somehow I knew at that age that Miles Davis was cool. And I don't know how, like in Dizzy and Louis Armstrong, like I somehow knew that at such a young age. Their legend just sort of resonated.
Because you can't
and
put
it's
on
in the air, right?
You can't put on like Kind of Blue, and you can't be a music fan and put on Kind of Blue and not fucking feel something.
Right. And yet, like, but it wasn't like I had that record. It wasn't even like my parents were particularly into that music. So there wasn't really the influence coming from there. It's just pervasive in the culture. Right. So, so that was the first experience with playing an instrument. And then it was a few years of just being a little teenage punk and like I say, becoming a metalhead. And then by the time I was 17, my last year of high school,
when all you learned power chords for the first time.
Yeah.
We could play anything.
And so I had friends by that age. I had friends that had been playing 3 years or 5 years. And, you know, if you're that age and somebody's been playing an instrument or doing anything for 5 years, you're like, oh, man.
Yeah.
They're like the god, right? Yeah. They have skills that you can't imagine.
It's all just tabs.
I got them to show me a few things, right? Yeah, I got hungry for it. When I picked up a guitar, I knew immediately. I knew within 2 weeks that I'd be doing it the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I truly did. Like it happened.
And
instantly.
You were, how old were you?
About 17.
About 17.
About a month away from my 17th birthday.
Yeah.
I remember it pretty clearly, the summer before grade 12.
God, that's the same age I did. I started smoking.
Right.
I didn't know how long I'd be doing it. It's a better habit. You picked up a better habit.
I think so, more constructive. But yeah, it was like that. It was really like that. It happened so fast. It just felt so right. And it was just, I just realized it was like this puzzle, right? That I just wanted to spend the rest of my life figuring out and see how far I could take it.
I remember watching, it's funny you talk about being a puzzle, because I remember like I played bass guitar in band, and then I played in bands all through high school because it was the easiest way to play in a band. Was if you played the bass or the drums. You could always be in a band if you played the bass or the drums. But I played guitar as well, and I was mostly just like I used the guitar like I always felt like I was a songwriter before I was a guitar player, because I was never that good at the guitar. I could muddle through 3 or 4 chords to like put lyrics to something that I had put music to something that I had written.
Right.
And that's kind of how that was sort of my way into the guitar, which never really progressed beyond that. And I would think I was about 20, early 20s. My brother, one of my younger brothers, 6 years younger than me, and he picked up the guitar when he was about 13, 14 years old. So I would have been 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, he was better than I will ever be.
Yeah.
And he spoke about it the same way, how it was like a puzzle that he needed to unlock. And the way that he the way that he looked at scales. And I've heard multiple guitarists talk about the way that they, approach it as being something that there's like, and the notion that no one ever really writes a piece of music. They find it because it's all already there.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, composition is really just
not to belittle writers, but like,
no, not at all. I think anybody who's honest about their writing recognizes that you're just kind of combining existing elements.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what
it's
makes
all out there. And
so many, which makes all the different styles of genres so amazing and magical, because it's like, the fact that you can, the same, it's like fun math.
Yeah.
It's like you have the same elements, create instruments and styles in India.
Yeah.
That sound completely different.
Right.
But when you break it down, and I understand that from as a layperson, I do understand that the music theory for different regions is different.
Sure. Yeah.
But the elements are still there.
You're right.
They're the same thing.
There's pitches and rhythms and these sort of basic essential elements.
There's only so many notes.
Like
there's only a finite amount.
Yeah.
Which makes it
that's right. Yeah, it's a great point.
Really neat.
It does. Yeah, and that's the challenge of.
So did you? What were your influences growing up? Like you used to say
the musical influences.
Like what was around when you were going back a little further? What was around in your household when you were a kid?
Right. Yeah, good question. So of course, the earliest musical influences would have come from my parents, right? Yeah. And my mom and dad there was some crossover in their taste, but there was also, they had their own taste as well. Like on my mom's side, it was a lot of folk and rock. The Beatles, she loved the Beatles, of course. I mean, there's nothing shocking about that. Like another musician saying that they heard the Beatles early on. Like, big deal. But yeah, she was definitely a Beatles fan. And she loved Neil Young. And there was a lot of that. Those are some Paul Simon. Yeah. Those kind of 60s, 70s folk rock artists, Joni Mitchell,
my mom,
right?
Well,
So, and a lot of Canadian artists too, right? Yeah. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and stuff like that. So that was more the influence from my mom's side. She liked CCR a lot too, like for a little rockier, edgier.
I remember that when I found out that CCR was from San Francisco.
Right. Yeah. California. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you listen
I
to the
got
lyrics.
This like swampy thing.
Yeah, they got this born on a bayou, thing. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was my dad actually lived down the street from the Fogartys.
Right.
Mr. and Mrs. Fogarty after I think by this point because they were it's like 5 or 6 years they came and went skyrocketed to like multi-platinum and then broke up.
Right.
So I think by the early 70s they had already broken up. And my dad moved into this he was born in New York, and then when his father passed away, his mother, who was from San Francisco, moved their family back west to San Francisco, and they moved down the street from Mr. and Mrs. Fogarty.
Yeah.
So he lived like down the street from John Fogarty's parents.
Yeah. Amazing.
But I was like, they're from San Francisco? He was like, yeah, they're not from the South.
Yeah, that probably does.
They're
catch
amazing.
A lot of
I love
people.
them, but
yeah, but that probably does catch a lot of people by surprise, or they wouldn't necessarily think that.
Yeah. Sorry, what were your influences from your dad?
Right. So from my dad's side, it was Motown and soul music.
Cool.
It was Stevie Wonder and Smokey Robinson. Although my mom loved a lot of that music too. Sam and Dave, sure. And Roy Orbison, Elvis. My dad was a huge Elvis fan. You know, he grew up at that time, and so he had all the Elvis records and stuff like that. But a lot of Motown and soul music. Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard Sam Cooke.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up listening to Motown at all. I grew up like very similar influences from my mother, like Joni Mitchell, Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, and Neil Young, that kind of stuff. And then my dad was pretty into like he was big Allman Brothers fan, Jay Giles, Kansas, Marshall Tucker.
Right.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I grew up listening to a lot of that. So it wasn't until my I would say mid to late 20s that I started being exposed to more like Motown. I was a lot of blues from my dad, but I didn't really get like the connection to where. So I would think I was like 26 or 27 the first time I heard Sam Cooke, and I was like, this is just.
I mean, hearing someone like that, a singer like that, for the first time at that age.
Yeah, it was such a neat experience. That's a cool experience because it was like, and then through that was able to like, it was like a treasure trove of all this stuff, and that's what I love about. It's one of the many things that I love about music. Yeah, is you can find something, and you're never too old to be exposed.
That's right. At any time, right? At any time, something new can find
and being
you,
able
and
to like
go back and explore,
open that chest of amazing music, this entire catalog that I'd never been exposed to.
Definitely
was a neat experience.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I enjoy from my dad. So the thing about my parents is they were also about 10 years typically older than a lot of my friends' parents. My parents had us a little bit later in life than compared to a lot of my friends, it seemed. Anyway, not all of them, but most of them, right? So my parents were a little bit older, so they were listening to things that were a little bit older, right? I was a little kid in the 80s, 90s. And so a lot of my friends' parents were, so a lot of my friends were probably listening to more recent rock stuff, more of the 70s and 80s rock, where my parents were still more into the 60s music, right?
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then my dad, what I got from my dad is this love of like great diva singers. My dad is the biggest Mariah Carey fan, and he had those for her first awesome. Records and Celine Dion and like Whitney, right? He's all about that stuff.
Yeah.
He loves great singers, and he's so unapologetic about it and unassuming about it. Like he doesn't care what anybody thinks about that. He just loves a great voice, right? And a great singer, going back to Aretha Franklin and all those great classic soul divas, right? So he's huge on that stuff, and that had a massive impact on me because I love those singers now too, like and a lot of the newer ones, even more recent ones.
Tina,
right? Yeah. Oh yeah, my dad's a huge Tina fan.
So good, like early stuff, like everyone. I think a lot of, not everyone. I think music people know, and people that were around then know, but I think a lot of people in like my generation and below only know Tina as in like, what's love got to do with it? Because that's like, because that's the big, that's the one that people sing at weddings,
the big hits of the 80s. Yeah.
But you're going back to her catalog before that is like Fruits of the Night, like the old, just so good. So good.
Oh, she was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I love that your dad's like an unabashed, like huge Diva fan.
Massively. It's great. I love that about him. Yeah. I love that about him, and I love that I got that from him.
Yeah. We had I had Bradley Barkman on the show, and we talked about our love for Christina Aguilera.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah.
But like I love Whitney Houston and
me too. And I think it served me well, like working with some great singers, right? Working with Crystal and people like that around town here that are just amazing and do a lot of that repertoire, and it just makes it so much more fun and easier to learn. And when you love that stuff, when they're pulling out these old Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston songs that I've grown up with,
and they're like shocked,
and
I'm like, I know that one.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll learn this. I'm happy to learn this. I'll play this stuff all night.
It's like you go from Waylon Jennings to like Whitney Houston.
Totally,
I got this.
And again, like to me, there's no real difference.
There's no like transition.
I don't think of it. They're just like, because those as artists have far more in common to me than there are differences, right? They're just great artists making great music, right? It's soulful. It comes from the heart. It, from a sort of musicological or theoretical standpoint, you could analyze it and say there's these differences in the rhythms and chords and structures of the songs a little bit. But again, they're pretty minor differences to me when you step back and just look at the big picture of an artist expressing themselves, a human who's great at something.
Yeah. I think also a great example of that is when you have a song that crosses genres. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that like you have an artist that does the song I'm thinking of specifically is I Will Always Love You.
Right.
It starts.
It's a great example.
It's a country
great
tune,
example.
Right?
Yeah. It's a Dolly Parton.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a Whitney Houston tune.
Right.
It's a diva tune. No, it's a country tune. It's fucking both.
The answer is
and
yes.
Like you listen to them and you listen to them to back.
Yeah.
And you're like, they feel different because there's one of them's Dolly and one of them's Whitney.
So there's some stylistic differences.
But you're like, but it's the same tune.
It's the same song.
Yeah. And it's
same words, melody, chords. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just,
but it just goes to show, how these things can how they can be treated differently, by how great artists can sort of find their own style and their own way. And I mean, Dolly's version, Whitney's version, but they're amazing. Yeah. Right. They're amazing. Yeah. And for all the ways that they're different or similar, and that reminds me actually, and especially when you mention Waylon, of course, we don't think of Waylon without thinking of Willie.
Yeah.
And Willie Nelson, to me, you want to talk about like a musical chameleon, right? Or somebody who's
one of their albums that they did together. I forget what it's called.
A Waylon and Willie record?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah. They're amazing, right? Yeah. And Willie, like I just spent, we were out at my dad's place and stepmom's place in Agassiz at Christmas time. And he had Willie's 90th birthday concert, like recorded from last year.
Oh, crazy.
So we watched it. Yeah, like they did at the Hollywood Bowl back in April last year. It was amazing, right? This massive list of artists and some more contemporary, some younger people and some definitely some veterans in there too. George Strait was in there. They did Poncho and Lefty together, and like Sheryl Crow sang this amazing version of Crazy. Like it just blew me away. I was really impressed with her. But and then my dad gave me Willie's book. His new book is called Energy Follows Thought. It's kind of a coffee table book where he talks about songs. It just kind of, each couple of pages is like a song, and then he tells a story about how he wrote it. It's really cool. Really cool. But yeah, I mean, Willie's one of these people that's just, his artistry transcends genre, right? He's made jazz records. He's made reggae records. You know him as kind of a country artist because that's sort of where the roots are. But he's so much more than that, right? And that's why he can sit up there and do a duet with George Strait and then turn around and have Snoop Dogg come up on the stage, right? And you don't bat an eye, right? You don't really think. I mean, some people might. Some people are probably like, what the hell's he doing with Snoop?
I think everyone just makes the connection with the weed.
It's just, maybe there's that too. Yeah, there are other ways that people bond than just music. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, right? It's just people doing their thing and being who they are. And Willie's, I mean, one of the greatest examples of that to me. He's been such a hero, and he's such a legend that way because he just does his thing, right? He just does Willie, and he makes everything his own.
You think about artists like that have gone, like it's his 90th birthday.
Yeah.
Show. He's playing music his whole life.
Yeah.
You know, he's got, I'm not super well versed in the history of Willie Nelson, but let's just say 20, right? You know, you're 20 when you start like,
right.
That's, what is that? 70 fucking years playing music.
70 years in the music business. In
the music business. And the amount of people that he's played with and people he shared a stage with and everything. Like, you just kind of think about like what, and this sounds totally cheesy and cliche, but just you think about what those eyes have seen.
Yeah.
Like, I know artists.
Cheesy and all, it's real. Like there's a reality to that.
You know, and B.B. King was another one.
Yeah.
Who was in, I think he died in his late 80s.
Yeah, I think so.
But he played with fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Like he that was his thing. He'd be on stage. He'd have like, like 8 guitarists on stage. Like he'd have Petty and Clapton and Vaughn and just they all just be
John Mayer, like any of these guys, right? Young and old, right? Yeah. All of them.
And it was just, I mean, that must be such a cool thing to be able to be a part of for that long.
No doubt. Yeah. No doubt. And you know, here's to anybody that's still doing it. And I hope I'm still playing at 90.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, absolutely, man. I plan on it. I fully plan on it. I said it today. It's on record.
Well, then we're going to hold you to that because I'm totally going to live
have
that long.
90th birthday party. Invite all my friends and we'll play.
So where do you switching tangents a little bit? I want to talk a bit about your songwriting.
Okay.
Because for someone who has such an appreciation for so many different genres and grew up with so many different genres, do you is any of that conscious when you're writing?
Yeah. Like sort of combining elements or different genres.
Because when you write for the Jimmy Baldwin band, you're obviously writing different stuff than you are when you're writing for Camaro 67.
Yeah, definitely.
So is that done from a place? Is it just like, is it sort of just intrinsic, or is it something that you have to like consciously think about? Like this would work for my solo act. Yeah, this would work for Camaro.
It's pretty conscious. I'm pretty aware of it, right? Like if I'm writing music, I mean, for one thing, Camaro's an instrumental band, so there's that right away. I don't have to. I'm not concerned with lyric writing in that group, and you know, and the concept for that band is fairly clear in terms of an instrumental kind of funk thing with a bit of a rock edge, you know. So I'll have something fairly clear in mind conceptually if I'm writing a Camaro tune. Versus my own stuff is a little wider open, right? I'll allow things to be, you know, to play around with ideas a little more freely. But again, when I started getting serious about writing stuff for myself and doing the couple albums that I have now, the first of which goes back a little over 10 years. And my writing for that has been sporadic. Is one way to put it, right? It goes in phases and not enough of them. In fact, this year I really need to get my ass in gear and write some new songs. But from the beginning, I did have a concept of a kind of, you know, soulful country rock thing. I definitely didn't want to do like what you hear on kind of pop country radio. That hasn't interested me much for 20 years or more. But I didn't want to just be some kind of throwback traditionalist or something like that either. And not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, right? If that's what somebody does, that's great. If that's what they feel and they resonates with them and they feel strongly about and everything, then that's great. Power to them. I'm just speaking for myself.
Just isn't what
It
you
wasn't
wanted to
something
do.
that felt right for me. I always wanted to do something that was a bit of a hybrid for sure, you know? And again, that goes back to people like Miles Davis, these kind of innovators and iconoclasts and people who kind of Prince and David Bowie and these people who just kind of like, you know, were always kind of reinventing themselves and doing something different, right? I always kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. But I could consciously consider where I was drawing those things from. Because if you can overdo it with that too, right? If you just start grabbing stuff randomly from, you know, 12 different genres, it may not work. It could. And, you know, by all means, like, go for it. But to me, I wanted to keep it a little more focused, right? It was like, I wanted some of the feel and the funk. Like, to me, Waylon's bands were funky. The rhythm sections, the bass and drums, there's a fat pocket and this huge groove that I always really liked, right? And so I wanted some of that, and I wanted this kind of funky country thing, right? That had a bit of Waylon, but had a bit of Springsteen and some rock vibes to it as well, you know? So I could sort of consciously draw on elements from those kind of artists and songs and see where it leads. And, you know, but I think it's also a lot of just listening to enough of that stuff and having internalized a lot of that stuff that, it does. It comes out on its own. If I sit down and write a song just without much thought about it, or to just sit down to generate some ideas, there's probably going to be some Springsteen in it. Like there just is, right? It's how it is.
Do you find sort of, I get, for lack of a better phrase, genre defining in your own music a chore, or is it something that just, like, when you write something, you're like, yeah, okay, or like when you put together an album, you're like, okay, this is this type of country, or this type of rockabilly, or this type of rock.
Trying to get too hung up on it, but I will, you know, I mean, I've kind of, because as soon as you make a record and you're trying to put anything out there, you kind of have to have some terms to describe it. As much as a lot of us hate to do that. So and when people say, you know, when people say like, so what kind of music do you play, or what kind of album is it? You know, and of course you want to just say, listen to it. It's that kind, right? Like, the best way to know what any music is to listen to it, like any piece of art, right? It's like, and I'm always reminded of that Frank Zappa quote, right? Like, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. Right. It's when it comes to art, like, describing art and talking about it kind of defeats the purpose of it. Art is to be experienced, whether it's a painting or music or something else, right?
Did we just make our podcast obsolete?
No, I don't think so, because I think there is some value in having conversations about that still. But yeah, maybe it gets a bit meta or whatever. But you know what I mean? It gets tricky. It can be challenging, and a lot of us don't particularly like to, you know, to do that, but we also have to accept that it's part of the deal. So you have to get comfortable with it at some point. You have to have terms that describe yourself as an artist and your music, or whatever, your album, whatever it is you're putting out there. And what I kind of settled on when I first released Changing Time, you know, a little over 10 years ago, was country soul. Like, for a term, like, that's just what I wanted to call it. And for lack of anything better or more long-winded, you know, that kind of gets the point across, or gets you in the ballpark in 2 words, in the feels. Right? And so, you know, and since then, like, I would describe it like the album Lighthouse that I put out a couple of years ago is similar. It's kind of a continuation of the same sort of thing. There are country and rock elements, and you know, being used as a basis or a structure or a form for a few other things in there. There's always kind of a jazz element, I think, in everything that I do, because I'm a big fan of improvisation. I don't like things to always be totally arranged, right? Like, and I enjoy the contrast or the balance of a song that's written and arranged, but within it there's room for improvisation, like a solo that's played a little bit differently each time, or a solo that's, you know, even when recording it, is kind of a little bit off the cuff and not necessarily totally worked out.
Totally.
So there's those elements to it. But again, I'm not going to call the record like a country, soul, jazz, funk, rockabilly, blues album.
Don't put the word neo in it.
Yeah. Yeah. You can avoid that too, right?
It's funny. You mentioned, what kind of music you playing tonight? One of my like biggest pet peeves from working at Guild.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Is when people come up to you, like the doors are wide open and the band's in the middle of a fucking set.
So they're playing at that time.
And they come up and go, what kind of music is it tonight? And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, you can see them.
Yeah.
Like, the doors are open.
You can hear them. What would you call it?
What would you call it?
I
don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's like I could tell them different things, and what I tell them would affect their decision to come in.
Yeah.
They could come in and see they could come in and see Camaro 67 playing.
Yeah.
And
it's a death metal band.
I could tell them it was funk, and they'd be like, potentially they'd be like, cool. Or I could tell them it was like neo acid jazz.
Yeah.
Which they would be like, no.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter
what's that. I don't like that. Or they have some idea of what that is. And
it doesn't matter what's happening on stage. It doesn't matter what's playing. So I have.
That's funny. I never
started lying to people. I do like.
That's amazing that people will stand there like literally in front of a band that's playing and at that moment and ask like,
what kind of music is it?
What it is, because
it's like
it's
I mean, I can understand. I can understand someone being like, what would you call this?
Yeah, sure.
Like what kind of what?
Because that's a conversation that you can have, or you can sort of exchange ideas about how you describe it or whatever.
Yeah.
But
they walk past a line of 100 people to walk to the front the entire time listening to the band play. What kind of music is playing?
Yeah. But I mean, it goes to show, and I try to be, it's not, my attitude around this is not meant to be kind of elitist or snobby. I really try and avoid that around music, generally speaking, especially as, not just as an artist, but especially as an educator, right? Because music education is really important to me. I teach a lot and I love it. I care about it. It's something that I want to keep doing.
You teach privately?
I do. I teach at, I also teach at Place des Arts in Coquitlam, which is this amazing little art center out there. They do all kinds of stuff, like all sorts of visual art, dance programs, music, any instrument you want. There's all kinds of things going out there. I've been there for, I don't know, well over a decade. 13, 14 years or something.
Do you teach all ages or?
Private lessons and group classes on guitar. All ages I try not to take guitar students under about age 10, 8 or 9 on occasion. If they're really keen and they want to do it, sure, I'll give anybody a chance. But try and do about 10 and up, just because a lot of kids are so small. They're so tiny, and it's tough. It's tough to play guitar, when you're first starting out. So about that age up to, I have adult group classes that have been just rocking. I've been having so much fun with these adult groups the last couple of years, and there's been a lot of interest in that, which I think is really cool. It's really fun. And I've had students as old as in their 80s,
Neat.
Yeah, it's great.
That's cool.
I love it.
I love that.
Yeah. But
I have a lot of respect for because that you talk about. I went to theater school.
Where?
Studio 58.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like up by Langara or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's based out of Langara.
Yeah.
And there's a strong tenet in the education there was beginner's mind. Always having a beginner's mind, and that's not just that school. And it's not just that practice.
Yeah.
But always going into something like even something you've done for years. Go in with a beginner's mind. You're going to learn more. You're going to get more out of it, and you're going to grow more. And so when people I find it really inspirational when people who are later in life, whether or not they're middle-aged to senior citizens, taking on something that they've never done before.
Yeah.
Just to do it, to
It is. It's great. It's inspiring for sure. And I love to see that as well, because it's, and a lot of people struggle with it, right? I see, sometimes people ask me, is it challenging working with kids or whatever, right? And sure, it can be, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think what I often tell them is, thank you, the probably the greatest challenges that I've had in music education is working with adults that have real like blockages and sort of psychological barriers and fear around learning and trying stuff, right? Because
that's
with
the
kids,
thing.
like some kids might have some behavioral issues or whatever. You might deal with a little bit of that. I've been pretty fortunate not to have to deal with much of that at all. Most of the kids are great, but kids, they're still kids, right? With adults, the ego is formed, and it can be this massive hurdle, right? It creates these massive barriers to where people approach an instrument. I mean, sometimes you see this a little bit with kids at certain ages where they approach it with a bit of fear, but it's in adults, it's way more severe. It can actually be crippling. Like I've seen people, I've literally, worked with adults that like you just try them to get them to play something, and they're like red and frozen and like they're terrified. Their nervous system is responding as if this guitar is gonna like explode or set on fire or stab them, or like there's like these serious consequences, and there aren't. This is the thing, and this is what's so fascinating about it is there are no consequences to playing a wrong note or playing an instrument like poorly, or like trying to play some figure and you don't quite get it, right? There's no serious consequence to that, but people behave as if there is, right? It's really, and they have this real strong sense of kind of judgment and stuff like that can be really challenging to work with.
I think it's so much of it's because we're taught that it's not okay to fuck up.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be good right away.
You have to be, and it's like,
or there's something wrong, or you don't have,
head.
You don't have it or something like that. And that's why this term talent, right? I don't use it. I despise it. I avoid it. I don't like it. And the reason is because it comes along with this notion that like it undermines hard work, for one, right? Mm-hmm. When people see a great musician and they say, oh, they're so talented. Like what they mean is their skill.
Tens of thousands of hours.
They're looking at tens and thousands of hours of practice and to get there. And there will be those outliers and those exceptions and those people that just seem to get something quickly and easily. But again, they're outliers. They are exceptions. They're not, there's something else. And for most of us, most of the time, it's just putting in the work and putting in the effort. Yeah. And so I prefer to use the term skill. If I talk about a great musician or a great artist of any sort, I prefer to use that term because it's more realistic and it's more, and it kind of respects the craft and the dedication to it that we've been talking about, right? And sadly, again, I think the term talent and the concept of it, the ideas that people attach to it, has actually done a fair bit of harm in terms of discouraging people from continuing with things that they could have done well at and got some fulfillment out of, right? Because people, again, if they approach, say, an instrument with this idea that, some people have a talent for it and some don't, if they don't get it right away, they're going to think that they don't have the talent and they might as well just give up and do something else. Whereas if they just stuck with it, they might have gotten somewhere, and, maybe they're not going to be the next Eddie Van Halen, but they might have something, a hobby that's going to be fulfilling for them and be able to play some stuff over the years and have something that they can go to and do, right? So I like to really encourage people to just stick with it and put in the time. And
it can be
learning to play an instrument is hard, man. It's supposed to be hard. People say like, oh man, this is hard.
My fingers hurt.
It is, right? It is. Like, stick with it.
I don't
keep going.
I don't play nearly as much as I used to. And I don't really know why, but I know like I picked it up. I picked it up the other day, my guitar, and I just started noodling. And I played for about an hour.
Yeah, nice.
And I was like, I don't remember how to play so many of the things I used to know how to play. It's all like foggy, and I'm just like sitting there kind of noodling back and forth between the same 6 notes, just doing the thing. And my fingers, about like 35, 40 minutes into it, the fingers really started to hurt. I was like, it's been way too long since I picked up an instrument if they're hurting. But it was a kind of
that's great.
It was a cathartic, good kind of hurt too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's always something you can go back to, right? And again, like I don't think you need to be.
You don't have to take it to any particular level other than, your own sort of level of enjoyment. There's fulfillment that comes from that. And it brings up a good point, right? It does hurt, and there's something on the other side of that pain, right? That's the whole point. And we can get as real as you want with that. This applies to like, these are serious life lessons. This isn't just learning to play a guitar, right? It's like our whole lives are, and the whole experience of being a human comes down to these things, right? There's no growth in comfort, right? Our mission is to like go into our pain and heal it and learn and find what's on the other side of it, right? And learning an instrument can help teach you that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, again, I've had students, adult students that just kind of like refuse to do what's hard. They want the easy version of this chord and that chord, and right, and like the easy version of this song and that song. And then, 2-3 years of lessons or playing or whatever it's been, and they don't feel like they're improving, and they're wondering why. It's like there's no mystery here until we're willing to do what's hard. There won't be any growth or improvement. And if our orientation is around what's easy and comfortable, we'll just stay there.
Which I think is what we're like. Obviously, that's what we're inclined to do.
That's what the ego wants, right? Is what's easy and what's comfortable, right?
When you mentioned, it's funny because you mentioned people seeming to have like a crippling fear of just learning. Yeah. It's fun because I instantly thought of, I'm a terrible swimmer. I can
me too. I'm not a great swimmer. I can't dive. It's like,
And Freya is constantly trying to get me to go swimming. Yeah. And I never want to go. And I'm like, I can't. She's like, I can teach you. You can learn. I'm like, no. Yeah. No. Yeah. And it's this block in my head. Right. That I am too old to learn how to swim. Man, because it's like I go to the pool and it's fucking embarrassing for me. Yeah. But it's that shit is all in my head. That's right. No one actually cares. That's right. That I'm 39 and fact, don't really know how to swim.
To any extent that they do care, they're rooting for you.
Yeah, exactly.
They want you to win. We all do. In our hearts, like we want others
see someone trying to win do something and you're like, go for it.
And you see that and you're like, go get it, man. Absolutely. But again, in our heads, to the ego mind, it's like there's this real fear of failure and judgment of others and stuff like that. Again, I've had group classes of adults where, there's 5 or 6 of us sitting around there and we get a little blues thing going and to try and get people to take turns. Like I'll literally give them here are 3 notes that you can't play a wrong note, right? Like these 3 notes work over all the chords in the form, just play some little thing, just experiment, explore, go for it. There's a mistake isn't even possible. 1, 4, 5. Right? And 4 or 5 of those people will be all right with that. Yeah. And there'll be one person who's just frozen. And like I say, just red in the face, and they can't even function under those circumstances. The fear is so crippling, right? Yeah. And it's sad. It's tough it's frustrating, but it's out there. It's a real thing.
Because there's a part of me that really wants to tip my hat to that person that's there with
just for showing up,
just for being
definitely
there. You're so uncomfortable right now. It's physically manifesting in your entire body. Yeah, but you're here.
I agree. For sure. There is something to be said for that. I got to tell you a story about the swimming, because that's such a great example of it, right? Because swimming too is one of those skill sets that a lot of people either learn early on as children or maybe they don't at all, right? It's a very difficult thing for people to get over learning as a beginner in adulthood, right? And I can relate to that. And I'm an okay swimmer. I can swim enough to keep myself alive or swim around in a pool or a lake or whatever. Yeah. That's fine. But I never learned to dive. Mm-hmm. And over the last couple of summers, over COVID, when a lot of us musicians had a little more time on our hands in the summer with no festival touring season and stuff, we organized some group camping trips with a few friends of ours, and it's been great. It was really, really great. But there was one we went, we were out at Weaver Lake like a couple of years ago, and some friends of mine were there, and I was trying to. My friend was showing me how to dive a little bit because I'd never really learned how to do it.
Yeah,
and he gives me kind of walks me through the basics and whatever, shows me how to do it, and go off the little dock, and I just kind of it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
As you'd expect, the first couple of times you try it, right? And there was this great moment because I came up out of the water and I was like, man, this sucks. I can't do it. All this kind of had this really negative kind of attitude toward it in that moment, or I said something like that. And my friend, he made this brilliant point that, kind of frustrated me afterward because I should know this, again, from teaching music and anything else and life in general. But he was like, because I probably said something like, I can't get it. I'm never going to get it. He was like, what are you talking about? You just did it one time. Try it. What's it going to look like after 7 times, right?
Yeah.
10 times. But we defeat ourselves so quickly. Again, there's this real tendency to go so quickly to well, I didn't get it on the first time, so I guess I'll never get it at all, which is completely irrational, right? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And we get stuck in our ways too. We're like, I'm too old to do stuff I'm bad at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was a little frustrated with myself just around that, just but it was only a moment because I instantly realized what he was referring to and what I'd done, right? I just went to that place where you're
and I think we all have those things too, right? For me, there's a lot of stuff that I would be very comfortable being bad at. And I'd be like, this is why would I be expected to be good at this? I've never ever done this before.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah, that's a good point too, right? It's interesting. We all have our little spots.
But there's mental blocks. So for some people, it's like if someone handed me an instrument that I never played before and they were like, yeah, fiddle around with it. I'd be like,
yeah. But you wouldn't be self-conscious about not being a master of this instrument that you've never played.
But I'm going to the pool and I'm like, I'm not Mark Phelps.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking at me no one's fucking looking at you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It is. It's interesting.
Yeah. So we haven't talked about Five Alarm.
Mm-hmm.
How did you end up with, because were you in the original lineup of Five Alarm Funk?
No.
So how'd you end up with them?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is Teo reached out and asked me, but I do have a bit of a history with the band. I never played with them, but I was in the audience going to those shows and partying with those guys after the shows since 2008. I remember seeing them at Richards on Richards not long before Richards closed. I don't know if it was the very last show there because they played one of the last shows, if not the last show there.
They've been around
Teo will tell the story.
Years, haven't they?
20 years. 2003. Yeah. So last year was marked 20 years for that band. Yeah. And I moved to Vancouver to go to VCC 2005.
Cool.
So I started seeing the band play around town not long after that, 07, 08. Yeah. And I would go to shows and it was great. I loved the band and I loved the show from the beginning. And George grew up with a couple of those guys on the west side of Vancouver. So there was a social connection through him as well, which is how I met some of the guys in the band. And then by 2013, I think Teo and I kind of really hit it off and started to become pretty close friends, and we'd party together a lot and stuff in those days when I still
Did you ever play with Bazooka Picnic back in the day?
No, I remember that band though. But because I think they were doing that thing right around the same time we started Camaro, 2015.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so I knew the band, loved the band, partied with them sometimes, went to the shows. Yeah. And so in the back of my head, I was always kind of like, I hope I get a call to sub a show or a tour one of these days. It was always on a list. And I knew that I was somewhere on that list, right? If they needed a sub or something like that, right? So it was never much of a stretch. I wasn't totally shocked when I finally did get the call. Teo reached out in, I want to say October of 21. And so the other connection is, right, Ollie Gibson, who was who is like an original member of Five Alarm Funk. He and I were also the first two guitarists in Camaro when we started Camaro. Right. So we'd been playing together for a while. He actually ended up, after a couple of years, stepping away from Camaro because he was so busy with Five Alarm. Right. But there was that connection as well. And so Ollie moved to Vancouver Island and took kind of a day job. He works in like graphics and design and this kind of stuff. And you know, it just reached a point where between the move and the job, he was going to step away from the tour life and the band, right? So they were looking for, I think at first they were looking for a more or less kind of a temporary replacement, or there'd be at least a transition period. I don't know that they knew right away that it, you know, how it would all play out, right? Yeah. But so when Teo reached out in October of 21, he was asking me about a tour that they had booked at that time. There were some dates. It's like February, March of 2022. And of course I said, hell yeah. I said, yes, of course. You know, I'd love to play with you guys. And I was totally game for it. So I started learning the material, which was not easy because those tunes they're strange, man. They're out there but that's what's so cool about it, right? That's one of the things that's cool about it. And that makes them kind of hip and interesting is, you know, this, like none of the forms are that conventional and nothing kind of repeats the same way. There's always some variation when the thing comes back. And so it was a real challenge to learn that music, but it was fun. And so I said about that and rehearsed with the band a little bit, but we didn't get too far into rehearsals before there was like another pandemic wave, and these dates were all in the prairies. Right. So they got axed, like the February, March dates of that year got dropped. And so my first show with the band wasn't until March of that year, like a little up in Squamish. Oh, really? March of 22. And then I just, you know, here we are today. It's been a couple of years of touring with the guys and playing with them. And now, you know, rehearsing new material. They've been writing some new stuff. There's a handful of new tunes that we've been playing on the road since last year. And then there's another handful of newer ones that are being worked out right now. And then we'll do some recording a little bit later in the spring.
You mentioned that you started at VCC in 2005.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you started, you know, guitar in your hands when you were 17. If my math is correct, there's a bit of a gap between high school and music school.
Yeah. So when I went to VCC, like when I started there, you know, I was 25. I was a month away from my 26th birthday. Yeah. So I was one of the old guys. I was an old guy.
It's so weird.
It's insane to think of that now.
25, you were the old
guy. But I was because... I
went to theater school at 30 and I was ancient.
Right. Yeah. Even though, but there were probably some people, you wouldn't have been the oldest one either though. Right?
I was not. No, there was a couple.
So that was my experience with music school. Like there were definitely people in their 30s and even some people like, you know, 40s, 50s that were just kind of like retraining. They'd already had a long career doing something else, or they just wanted to get more into music, maybe almost more as a hobby, but they were there in the program. But like generally speaking, I did feel like kind of an old guy at 26 years of age, which is ridiculous. But it's because a lot of the students there were kind of 18 or 20 and pretty fresh out of high school, right? So, I graduated high school back in 97. I'm really dating myself here, but that's all.
I mean, I wasn't going to say. I think I had, I had
pinned it around that's there, the math. That's how it works out. And then, you know, I kind of putted around. I was in Prince George, and I hung around. I didn't know exactly, you know, kind of what I wanted to do with myself. And I ended up in a marketing management program in Prince George for about a year and a half. And then I dropped out of that because it was just like, I was doing well, and I've always done well at anything that I just sort of applied myself to. I was getting good grades and on the dean's list or whatever. And I was learning a few things. Mm-hmm. But I reached this point, it's funny because I have this memory of this kind of like eureka moment too. I was in a, you know, business statistics class or something like that. I was doing some of these marketing management courses. And at the same time, I've been reading a biography of Thelonious Monk. because I was this little like jazz geek at the time too.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in this business stats class and just going like, no,
this isn't
it, man. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Music is it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I just have to get after that. I have to honor that, right? There was a real calling within me. I had to be honest about it. And I went home and I called my mom and told her I was going to drop out. And to her credit, she was so understanding and supportive, and like, bless her heart for that. Like it was, I'll always remember that. It's a really nice memory of my mom, because she just understood, like not even the slightest resistance, not even like, oh, are you sure? Do you want to like finish, see it through or do this or that? No fear around it. Like, and a lot of parents, like I met people through music school that had issues with their parents, like with what they were doing, right? Or like had parents or grandparents that tried to talk them out of it or whatever. And I don't even blame the parents for that either, especially knowing what I know now, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, my mom was so wonderful about it. Really supportive and understanding. And my dad always has been too. I have to give credit to him. He's been really supportive of me that way. But that was the experience at that time. And I was just like, I got to get out of here. I got to, do music. And then so I set about just studying and practicing even harder. I found a guy in Prince George and started studying music theory with him. And I was like there at my desk, like writing out Bach chorales and doing analysis of all this stuff, classical pieces. And
did you study classical or jazz?
I did. I started studying classical music just because that's what the theory was sort of rooted in and based on. And I really nerded out on this stuff and really loved it. And a couple of years went by. I also ended up like traveling, like backpacking around Europe for a year and doing that whole thing at like 23 years of age. And when I came back to Prince George,
you were a man of the world by the time you came back to school.
I was. That was the thing. I had a lot of experience, including, it's a little bit darker, a little bit sad, but it's the way it's life. Like when I came back from Europe, my mom was sick with cancer. So I stayed with her and cared for her for the following maybe 10 months until she died in the spring of 2004. That was in your 20s. So that'll be 20 years ago in April. I was about 24 at that time. And it's a heavy thing to deal with at any age, but especially at that age.
I lost my mom to cancer. That was about 32, I think.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough, right? And but that's what happened. And I was, sort of practicing and studying all the while and trying to make some plans while being there for her, right? And then so I guess, spring of 2004. Well, then fall of 2004, I did another little like trip a couple months across North Africa. Yeah. And then by the spring of 2005, like I started applying to music school. I was actually going to go to CAP because I knew they had a music program and a good reputation as like a bebop program, which I wanted. I wanted to study jazz and bebop, but I auditioned at both, got accepted at both. VCC offered me a little bit of a scholarship, and I just heard really good things about that program. And as much as I really wanted to study jazz, I did hear that CAP had this reputation for being fairly rigid about it, whereas VCC was like, play what you want.
Right.
And I thought that was cool. That worked for me. So that's where I went. And honestly, that's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. I to this day work with musicians that went through that program, and some of my best friends. We went through school there. George, Cool Keys, right? We did our degrees together there, and it's great. It's just led to so many great things, and I love that program and the faculty there. It's near and dear to my heart for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Before we sign off, I want you mentioned Changing Time, your first album, and Lighthouse. You released a couple years ago.
Yeah, late 2020, I guess. So it's been it's a little over 3 years now. Yeah, I'm due.
And Camaro 67 has some recorded stuff as well, right?
Yeah, we released 2 records. Yeah. Burn Rubber, Not Your Soul was the first one. And the second one was...
Where can we find those?
Camaro you'd probably find everywhere, including Spotify. My music isn't on Spotify, but I'm kind of reconsidering my position on that. I've had mixed feelings about that whole streaming thing over the years. We don't need to get into it, especially if we don't have much time left. But I've kind of been a bit of a, bit of a conscientious objector to that up to this point. But I'm also, like I said, I'm kind of reconsidering my stance on that. Maybe it's a little bit of, if you can't beat them, join them. But it's also just a little bit of straight up curiosity and kind of seeing where things could lead, because, but otherwise you can definitely find me on Bandcamp. And I think Bandcamp is excellent because, again, it's like the money goes to the artist. And so that's the thing that I want to push more than anything. And then, probably Apple Music. I think Changing Time was always on Apple Music. I don't know if Lighthouse made it on there. I should check, because that's my job to know this stuff. That's my business. But yeah, and I'm definitely planning to get a little more out there this year, and generate a little more content. I have some ideas about between YouTube and Instagram, just getting some more stuff up there, guitar videos, maybe some educational, instructional stuff, as well as my own music, and then do some new writing and recording for sure.
Well, I look forward to all those things.
Yeah, me too,
awesome.
Man. This has been fun. Thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks for having me, brother. It's great. Appreciate it. Yeah.